Hello and welcome. I'm Carol DeChaine, your intuitive spiritual guide for practical matters. And this week and this whole month, I'm talking about freedom. And it works for July, right? This week, it's freedom from guilt. And sometimes we don't have much guilt about much, and other times we could have a lot. I know the biggest thing I think I've ever felt guilt about was having asking for my divorce because I felt like I was throwing this huge pain on someone that didn't really deserve it. I mean, he had issues that weren't a good match, but I didn't want to hurt him, so I kept putting off talking to him. And it really felt like the guilt that I felt before I even did it because I didn't want to hurt him, and the guilt afterwards were huge. And honestly, I learned a lot about guilt, not only when I went through it, but when I read The Gifts of Icus, which is a book by Wayne Dyer that pretty much nobody ever knows about. I think he might have been a little embarrassed about that book because the one time I heard him talk about it, he was like, "Oh well, yeah, it was kind of a fun book to write," and that's kind of what he did. But it's like a parable about people who live on a different planet and how they see things that we do. Because guilt, they had something called rewind, which is what we used to do. So it's obviously an older book. When you want to go back on a tape, on a cassette, you would hit rewind. Or on an old school, on like the old reel to reels or something, which I think I've used once in my entire life. Uh, and so you would hit rewind. And you'd go back and you'd listen to something again. And in the book, they're able to go back and fix what they had guilt about and then move forward and come back to the present. Because they were saying, well, why do you have guilt? You can't do anything about it. Just learn and move on. And I loved that because I learned to release guilt when I was going through my one major guilt thing that I was going through, my guilt trip, because I realized that we both would be better for it in the long run because together we weren't having our best selves. We both had different goals for our lives that didn't realize it going in. We didn't even talk about goals other than just being a couple. And the guilt I felt for hurting him was something that I couldn't go back and change because I did it in the best way I knew how, which is, telling somebody you don't want them in your life anymore is really tough because if they love you, you feel bad when they're devastated. But I didn't have anybody else in my life. It wasn't like I was moving forward with someone else. I just felt like no matter what happened, our goals were always going to be different. Our paths were always going to be different. And I didn't realize it early on. So that guilt I felt was something I can't change the past, but I can change the way I'm acting from here forward. And I did the best I could to make it what I would call an easy, no such thing, divorce because I was trying to be kind. I was trying not to be obnoxious or rude or horrible because that was me dealing with my guilt and not wanting to be a different person than who I am. I didn't want to be nasty or any of those things. And he made it easy. We had some issues, but it was something that I went through because I needed to learn. And if you're feeling guilt, when you get that freedom from it, when you realize, hey, I'm done, I've talked to this person if I need to in order to do what I can to make a difference. Maybe you look at it, even though you can't rewind and change it, you can look at it and say, okay, what can I do better next time? Number one, you can always do that. But you can also look at it and say, what did I learn? Where can I grow? Rather than just saying, I'll do better next time. Really look at it in depth and see how you did it. And if you couldn't have done any different, give yourself a break. Because that freedom from guilt, I mean, even if you need to go back and say, I'm sorry to that person, or write them a letter, if they're deceased, you can write them a letter and then burn it and send it out into the ethers and say, I'm really, really sorry, because you will release that guilt. Because guilt is not about anybody else but yourself. You felt like you could have done better. You felt like you didn't do it something the way you wanted to do it. And so you feel guilty about it. You feel like, oh, dang, I could have not hurt somebody. I could have maybe done this test better, although usually you don't feel guilty for that. But there are things that whatever it is you feel guilty for, maybe you did something really horrible. but you've learned such a big lesson from it, and maybe you've shifted and grown and changed, and you need to make reparations for something. Whether the reparations in your head and what you think you need to do is something that is you're capable of or not. Because like I said, maybe the person has died. Maybe you can't really go back and make reparations to that person, but you want to do it to the family or to a spouse or to whoever it might be. Maybe you can have a chat with that person who's remaining. Or maybe, like I said, you choose, you don't know where they are, you don't want to go find them, and so you type up a letter or handwrite out a letter, and you look at it, you read it, and you release all of that guilt into that letter. And then take something safe, like either a bowl or something that you can burn it in. Maybe you put it in the sink to make sure you don't have an issue, and then burn that piece of paper and see it going out and releasing and letting it go. Because so many times we hold on to that guilt and it's not hurting anybody but ourselves. And even if it's a huge thing that you did awful, you can release that guilt and find love for yourself, knowing that maybe if it was truly horrible, that it was something you did in the past and you feel like a different person now. Whether you found religion or whatever it is, so that you found more love in your heart, you've shifted so much, it's almost like you're looking back on another lifetime where that's not who you are now. Then, because if you feel guilt, then you know that you have shifted. You know that it's something that, I mean, people that what they used to call black-hearted, where they had no guilt whatsoever, they are like amoral, they kill, they do all sorts of things. That's not who you are if you have guilt. So know that you can shift away from that guilt. You can release it and have freedom from it if you truly want to. No matter what you may have done, if you have guilt, then you have that feeling that you should not have done something, or that you could have done it better if it's something that you could only do so much and you hurt someone. Guilt isn't helping anyone unless you shift something that you did in the past. And we can't rewind, like Wayne Dyer talked about, and change it. But you can go forward from here. What can you do to let that guilt go? Look at it. Realize you don't need to hold on to it. It's not helping you any. If it makes you a better person by holding on to the guilt, think again. It really doesn't. It's better for you to learn from it, to grow from it, to realize who you are now and how you would do things differently now. And then you can let it go. Send that person love, send that person respect, write a letter, burn it, whatever you need to do to feel like you can release it. Because honestly, freedom from guilt is something that you can have. And it shouldn't take a therapist, but it may. And if it does, it's worth it. Because when you have freedom, you'll feel lighter and you'll be able to breathe again, especially if it's a really heavy guilt that you have. Release it. Allow yourself to have that freedom, even if you don't think you deserve it, because you do. You deserve to have every joyful thing in life, no matter what has happened in the past. Especially if you feel guilt, you know that you actually have learned something already. You've learned that it's something that you don't want to repeat. It's something you don't want in your life. It's something that you can let go of if you find the right little buttons to push, the right combination of things to release it out of yourself, to be more at peace. And isn't that what we all want? To be at peace and to have more joy in our lives. Thank you for joining me here today. Again, my name is Carol DeChaine, and you can find more information on my website at connecttojoy.com, which is also the name of my podcast, Connect the number 2, Joy. And you'll find information on my podcast, not only on my website, but also on almost all podcast channels. And on my website, you will also find information on life coaching and how to work with me, on Marconics multidimensional energy, on energy space clearing, and on all sorts of other things, as well as you can learn contact me in order to find out about past life readings and things like that. So until next week, remember that you can have the freedom and the peace and the joy in this life. But it may require a little bit of work, but you're worth it.